Okay, well, good evening, everybody. It's fantastic to have some real people here in a real room. It's wonderful, so we're so pleased to be able to do this in person. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Matthew Jarron. I'm the museum curator here at the university, and I programme the exhibitions here in the Tower building. So hopefully you've all had a chance to see the exhibition called Let's Go Round Again upstairs, which features works by various artists and designers who were all at the Art College between 1968 and 1972. Both student work that they created at the time and also more recent work as well. And so we're delighted to have 4 former students who are featured in that exhibition. So I shall introduce them. So we have 2 textile students, Sheila Mortlock and Dorothy Walker, and 2 drawing and painting students, Janet Todd and Anne Skinner. And we're also particularly delighted to have one of the very few female lecturers from that time, Sheila Macfarlane, who was then Sheila Green, head of printmaking. So confusingly, we have 2 Sheilas here tonight, but hopefully it won't make sense. I realise that makes me sound Australian. There's a couple of Sheilas here in the audience. I better not be done with story So I thought just before I start to grill them with various questions, I thought it'd be worth just giving you a bit of context with a few facts and figures. So most of you would probably know that the Art College started as part of Dundee Technical Institute in the building literally just right next door that way. The old Technical Institute there on Smalls Wynd in 1888. And women were allowed to attend from the start, but because it was a technical college, of course, the vast majority of the students were men. And that really remained the case up until the college moved to Bell Street between 1909 to 1910. And that allowed further expansion. And it's really at that point that we start to see women students attending in much larger numbers. In 1912, the first female member of staff joins, Edith Chain, who was employed to teach embroidery. And her post basically was what became the head of women's crafts, as it was known, which continued right up until the 1980s with Marion Stewart. We'll no doubt be hearing more about Marion later on. But female students remained very much in the minority, and even during the First World War, when obviously so many men were away, they were still vastly outnumbering the women. But it's interesting that when the first proper diploma course in design was introduced in 1915, the first 2 students to actually complete that course and gain their diplomas were both women. And really from that point, the numbers of women students gradually increased, and at the time that we're going to be talking about, in the late 60s and early 70s, about 40% of diploma students in art and design subjects were women. Now I say in art and design subjects because the college also taught architecture and town planning, and those were still totally male dominated. In fact, I don't know that there were any women doing those subjects at that time. But that kind of number of sort of around about 40% women was not in any way reflected in the staff. So for many years, Marion Stewart was the only female lecturer. In 1966, she was joined by Chrissy White in textiles, and then in 1970 by Sheila here as head of printmaking. Now, all those posts were in the School of Design. There were no female staff at all in the School of Drawing and Painting or Sculpture. And interestingly, in the whole of the 32 years that Alberto Morocco was head of drawing and painting, between 1950 and 1982, he did not employ a single woman on the staff, which is really pretty extraordinary. There were 2 women on the staff when he joined, the sisters Winifred and Alison Mackenzie. They left in 1957, and there wasn't another woman employed in a fine art subject until Elaine Shemelt became head of fine art printmaking in 1988. So that's over 30 years. It's really quite extraordinary. I should also note that at the time that we're talking about, there was briefly a woman lecturing in the General Studies Department, Wendy Pirrie, but she was only here for a year and then very tragically was killed in a car accident in 1970. So that's really just to give you a bit of context for our discussion tonight. And so I wanted to start off really by turning to our 4 former students and just maybe getting each of you to talk a bit about your experiences before you came to college. So you're already not wanting to do this. So the kind of your early experiences of art and design, what it was that prompted you to go to the college, were there particular influences that encouraged you to do that, and I guess what your expectations of art college were like before you went, if you can remember, and what kind of career you felt you might have afterwards. So,
I might start.
Janet, you've got the microphone, so maybe you're going to
Does this work? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Well, I originally come from Dundee, Dorothy in Lochee, and my parents moved away, and my dad had quite a few jobs, so my schooling was really, I went to 4 secondary schools in the end, and I left at 15 with 1 O-level, but I knew I wanted to do art. So I worked, I got a job, and I used to go to Glasgow Art School at night for drawing classes from 64 till 68. And my dad, I remember, was very concerned about why did I want to go to art school and was there any prospects. And he actually went to see the principal of Glasgow School of Art at the time, and mentioned that his daughter was keen to go to art school. The principal said, "Oh, women only go to get married, you know, to find a husband." And that was it. But I just had a bee in my bonnet that this is what I wanted to do, and I did all my hires at O levels. One had gone to school at night classes, and eventually was accepted by Duncan of Jordanstone. And I think at the time I thought I might go into design, but once I was at the college it was really painting that I wanted to do. To be quite honest, I don't think there were any female artists that I'd really heard of. You know, when you do your higher history of art, it was all men, it was all the impressionists and post-impressionists. Very few British artists, I think, were ever in the history of art as well. It was either Italian or continental. And I wish we had more information about the women artists that there were, but they just didn't, you know, they just didn't seem to feature at all in any of the art history books. So that was my background. The only other thing was my grandmother used to paint on china. She was a tailoress, but her hobby was china painting, and she taught me to do that when I was really young, about 13. So I did have a wee bit of an artistic background, if you like. So that was me coming to art college. Do you want to? Oh, there you go.
I suppose so. Yeah, well, I'm Dundee born and bred, and as a young girl, I used to draw in all the pages of my dad Ravi Burns books because I didn't have a sketch pad. I occasionally would get a pencil, and then it occurred to my parents that maybe I quite liked doing this, so occasionally I was brought some paper home from somewhere, and so I just used to draw naturally. And I went, after primary school, I went to a junior secondary school, and Hazel here was at the same school, and it was rule by rod, I think was the expression we would have used, and you weren't really encouraged as women to have your own voice, in fact no voice at all. But I really enjoyed art, and I really enjoyed the art department with some super teachers that really, really encouraged you. But the careers people said, for a woman, it would be really nice to have a job as a secretary. It would be really very good for you, so I think you should do commercial. So I can type and do shorthand, as Janet can as well. So I did in the commercial one, or I could have done domestic, which would have been fab, really, because you got shown how to clean the little house that was at Logie and polish the brasses. So that would have stood me in good stead if I'd wanted to be a housewife, I'm sure. But anyway, I did that, and then I went on to Harris after that to do my hires. It never occurred to me to do anything else but want to go to art college, and I remember seeing the people at the art college coming out, and there was something about them. I'd never been in the art college. The only art I was exposed to was at Dundee McManus at the Albert Institute down the road there, and we would go to the library to do some art history as part of your hire, and to get into the library, the art library, you had to go behind a screen.
That's right.
There was a curtain, and if you asked to say, can I get to see some, Renoirs or something like that, or some books? Yes. And you all had to tiptoe round, open the curtain, and you were allowed in because there was nudes. And you weren't allowed to take them out of there. Or I can't quite remember. But anyway, that's the sort of education. But and as a young girl, I remember going to the gallery and looking at all these sort of Victorian paintings, but there was one painting by James Cowie, and it's of a little girl who's very static, looking out from an oval mirror, and I just fell in love with it, and I thought, I want to do that. And I knew instinctively that was all I wanted to do with my life, was to be able to express yourself through paint. So I stuck in at school, despite everything they did at Logie Junior Secondary to talk me out of it, and got into Duncan Jordanstone. So that's my wee story.
We'll turn to Sheila actually next.
Sheila?
Sheila? I'm sorry, let's go.
Well, I'm also born and bred in Dundee, but in the Broughty Ferry end.
Oh, she's posh. she's the posh one.
I went to Grove Academy, and from the age of, I think, about 14, I had the art department in the Grove Academy, and it's something that stayed with me throughout my teaching career, how important it is for, teachers can change pupils' lives.
That's true, yeah.
And the art department at Grove were brilliant, led by Leslie Stewart, but there was a woman who came to teach. She came as an unmarried woman. She was engaged, and very quickly she was married, and she just epitomised everything that I thought, oh, I'd love to do that. So much so that she had studied textiles, printed textiles and embroidery, and I decided that's what I wanted to do. So it was only after I was at art college I realised that I was not unique by any stretch, but the vast majority of people did not have a clear path of where they wanted to go, but I did, and it was always going to be printed textiles and embroidery. I think I came to art college when I just done my hires. But I knew even at that time that we nearly all went into teaching.
Yeah.
So we had to have the hires for going to art college, but also to take that further and do the 1-year teacher training afterwards. Excuse me. Nothing nasty.
Just be tested.
So it was. I was an only child as well, and I was that little bit younger than most of the people in my year. I still say I'm still a little bit younger. Yes. But it was.
I'm wearing well.
It was quite. It was an education in life coming to art college for me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It was. There were things. As you were saying, the nudes, the life drawing, the face of, what was his name? There was a teacher, one of the lecturers, and he would give us clothes models to begin with, and then...
who was that? Was that Jimmy
Gordon Cameron?
No, it'll come to me.
Yeah.
He would give us clothes models to begin with, and then one day we went in and there was a nude sitting there, and particularly the boys, but I must say the girls were a bit nonplussed by this as well. So it was just a complete education coming to the art college, and a wonderful education as well. I think
absolutely,
the friends that we made,
still all friends.
We're still all friends. So it was good. So that was my background.
Yeah.
Dorothy, I know you had a slightly different experience because you obviously worked for a bit before coming
Yes,
to
I
college.
did. Although I was interested to hear Anne talking about junior secondary, because I also went to junior secondary, but at the other end of the city. I had been at Downfield Primary, and then I had not done terribly well there at all. And it was a revelation to me to go to this junior secondary, Stogswell Girls Secondary School. And when I say girls, it was quite interesting because it was an experiment that Dundee had decided to try to see whether it would work better to have the girls' school separate from the boys' school. And the boys' school turned out to be exceedingly tough because I've had quite a few friends that were educated there. But the girls' school was really superb because Mary McKeever, who was the head teacher there and went on to be the head of Hutchison's Grammar School, was determined that we were all going to have a career and that we were not going to, and I was never then really aware of this thing that girls couldn't do certain things. And I went on from there to Morgan to do my hires, and when I got an opportunity when I left school to go into a photographic studio, and I would say that was the first time I really fully realised that a girl's route was different from a boy's route, because I was out learning the whole trade of photography, both amateur and professional. When I say amateur, I was developing and printing people's snapshots from their summer holidays, but I was also going out and learning how to handle cameras and to do wedding photography and that kind of thing. And I became aware that suddenly I wasn't going out on any more wedding photography or going to some of the factories to take photographs, professional photographs. So I went to see the boss and I said, what's the story? He says, oh, we've changed our policy now. We're not having any women in the professional department. And do you know this? I was furious, because not only was that happening, the boys were getting twice as much money as I was. I started on £5, 10 shillings a week, and they were on £11, which was a lot of money. So there and then I decided, right, I'm going to go, and I thought I was going to do graphic design and take photography, which didn't work out that way for me, but I did enjoy doing all that. But I got into art college, and I felt justified in going there. But when I was there, I was 21 when I started, so I maybe had a more. I think I'd been to Europe and I'd done a lot of all the naughty things before I went to art college, and so I was maybe kind of different in some ways with that. But no, I loved it all, and I met some wonderful friends and lecturers.
Yes, well, I'm going to turn to Sheila next. Okay, so obviously the same kind of question as to the various things that you did before you came to teach at the art college. I mean, you studied at Edinburgh College of Art, but then you had some quite extraordinary experiences in Paris as well, so maybe you could say a little bit about that.
Yes, after I left college in Edinburgh, I taught for 2 years in Fraserburgh, about as far north as you can get from Edinburgh as possible. I enjoyed my time there. I started a folk song club, another of my interests. And then I was home for a weekend one time, and a film came on television about the studio in Paris, Atelier 17, run by Bill Hayter. And I was so excited about it, the effects I saw with etching that they were doing there, very experimental work, never seen anything like it. So I immediately decided I was going there. I told my parents, I'm going there, I said, at the end of the programme, and they both looked at me and said, what? You don't even speak French, how can you go there? And I said, I'm going, that's it. And I applied, I went out for an interview. Bill wasn't very happy about taking me because he said I was too young. And I actually worked for another 2 years before I went out again because I needed to save money. I was lucky enough to get a small scholarship that was available in Aberdeenshire for teacher studies. Of course, I didn't expect teachers to go away to Paris for 2 years. And on that, I managed to go and survive for a while. It was probably one of the most important experiences of my life. I really enjoyed the studio. I enjoyed the people I met there. I enjoyed Paris. I also took part in supporting the students in the '68 riots, which it was a time of great unrest and all sorts of things going on. and I went to support my fellow students. Somebody came into the studio one day, one of the men came in, and with his head all bandaged, and I hadn't really quite picked up on all the stuff that was happening then. When I saw that, it was like, who did that to you? The police, and why, and all this, and the whole story about it came out. So, right, I'm with you. So then it was printing posters, distributing them. It was very dangerous if you were even caught with a reel of newsprint under your arm. You were likely to be arrested and dragged off. And they called in the riot police. And these were not guys to mess with. Some of them were ex-foreign legionaries. So students were beaten up.
Oh my goodness. That's
Some were thrown in the river. Heard of a couple of cases of people drowning there. But it was just busy doing all these things. There was also the moments of humour, because there was an American at the studio who was very, very keen to collect posters to take back to America. So we used to print our posters. We used to sneak at night to when it was dark, put them up in some really dodgy place which was dangerous to go because the police would get you, and then we used to tell them where they were, and we would hide and just roar with laughter, watching him, prizing him off the wall, and he kept looking over his shoulder. The police were really terrified of being caught with the police. And he was in such a hurry sometimes that he took half the masonry off the wall. He brought a pile of them into the studio one day, and they had all this brickwork still stuck in the back of them. So that was part of the things that were happening there. But it was a very formative year because I met a lot of other artists. There were artists from all over the world, and I learned superb printing techniques. And Atelier 17 is really like a great big family. If you look at the website for it now, there are hundreds of students over the years have worked there, and many of them in really prominent positions in universities and art colleges all over the world. So it was wonderful. It wasn't the only thing I was doing there, because I have wide interests. I was also meeting up with the Bretons, being Scottish. The Bretons were very welcoming, and they had a secret headquarters in Paris that you went on a Thursday night, and there were songs and music. There I met the harpist Alan Stivell, and in fact I'd actually met him because I'd gone with a French friend to sing at the American Centre in Boulevard Raspail, who had an old-fashioned hootenanny night every Thursday, and went along there to sing. And when I came out, waiting for me at the door was Alan Stivell and three Bretons, which each had a little rucksack on their back containing a set of the Breton bagpipes. And he invited us to go. Well, he invited me. My French friend couldn't go because she was French, and the Bretons and the French were, well, the Bretons were blowing up post boxes and things, let's put it like that. So you didn't mix. I couldn't tell her where it was even. I was sworn to secrecy. She would go along there, and inevitably they had a big barrel of Breton apple brandy as well. So there were wonderful times.
So do you want to come on to applying to the job here?
Yes.
And I remember you telling me about the interview that you had.
Yes.
You can tell us.
Okay. So I did another couple of years teaching in schools in Fife when I came back here. And I really found that difficult coming back to Fife after Paris. You couldn't even get yogurt here. and I applied for the job at Dundee College of Art in Printmaking. Joseph Sokalski wanted to retire, and there was actually a secret interview before the job because I applied for it, but they'd heard about me, and I was invited over to St Andrews one afternoon to meet Joseph and meet Ron Sternberg, who was head of illustration, because the schools worked together. And this was just like a pre-meeting, I think, to check me out and see if they thought they could work with me. And then I got the invitation to the job interview at Dundee. And I began to realise at the interview that, you know, the kind of questions I was asked, that I might have a bit of a struggle with some members of staff. One of the questions they asked was, someone said, "She's much prettier than you, Joseph." And then Maya Rackham said, "What happens if you decide to get married and leave?"
Oh.
And I said, "Well, if you feel like that about it, why don't you put a price in my head, and the one who takes me away has to pay you?"
Good answer.
And, well, you know, it was unbelievable.
Yeah, that's extraordinary.
And the next thing was, I couldn't find a loo. I couldn't find the one in the hotel, went up to the art school, so again asked for the loo, and I was directed across the corridor from the boardroom. It was locked. Marion and company kept the key, and you couldn't get in. I never ever used that loo. I just had to go to the gents or the students. Weird. I mean, I would say, you know, there may be misogyny, but sometimes women don't help themselves.
Well, that's
Oh,
true.
that's true.
Well, that's true. Have to keep the key.
Yes.
That's really interesting.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So let's return to our students, and you've arrived at the art college, and I know that one of the less appealing things that you all had to endure was the Canteen Queen elections. That I don't know who would like to explain what these were. And
I'll go for that.
You go for that.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the Canteen Queen was quite an extraordinary event, as the ladies will testify to. I remember, I mean, I repeated first year, so I had experienced this twice, but certainly in my first year it was an extraordinary event, because we were all terribly young, terribly innocent, just out of school, you know, fairly sheltered, and we had no idea what was about to happen. And we'd gone into the canteen one day, as you did, you know, thinking you were really grown up. I had my art college scarf wrapped around my neck, thinking, you know, we were really cool, and there was all these older people there, and you just had your coffee and your egg roll or whatever else you were having. And then all of a sudden, there was this sort of noise, and what seemed like millions of architects and town planners, and some very big, hairy Norwegian architects with the beards, like, you know, they really did. Great big guys suddenly started picking up all the first year girls, and I was really wee and skinny, so I got wheeked out of there. And
They came into the loos, I think.
and they did.
And they us into the loos. And
That's right, and if there wasn't enough women, they thought, where's so-and-so, so-and-so? And they went into the loos, and they would take the girls out the loos. Now, you were manhandled for a start, and we were all kind of screaming, no idea what was going to happen. And then we were all lined up in a row, and we had to go on top of the tables, and we had to walk down the tables.
yes, they made it like a cat.
Like a catwalk. We were given names like Misconception, Mistaken, Miscarriage, really names like that. And I remember being like you know, a startled cat, like, oh, what's going on? And you were made to parade down this canteen, through the canteen, and people started throwing things at you. So there was toilet rolls and pots. Some of the young lads, or the older lads or whatever, seemed to think it was really amusing to go down low as you had your little mini skirts on. You were and then you were lifted and dragged off. And the person who actually won the Canteen Queen, when I say, because we were all quite shocked by this, was always the largest lady. And so there was a huge degree of humiliation for everybody, but for particularly the one that was chosen. I think she got a banner, didn't? A sash. Oh, sorry. She had a sash put round her, and she had to then parade up and down. It really was extraordinarily humiliating, and I remember being so shocked actually. I thought, so this is what our college is like. And of course you were so young that you kind of went along with it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you girls would
Yeah.
say anything like that.
No,
I seem to remember something about a wet T-shirt thing. Was that the same thing?
Well, I think they tried to do that. I
Because
remember not getting...
I thought that was awful.
Yes, it was.
I was horrified.
Yeah, that's right. But I think we managed, the girls managed to get out of that one.
Yeah.
But there was something like that.
I think it started with the being dragged out of the toilet.
Yeah.
That in itself, because you always think the ladies' toilet is
Yeah.
sacrosanct, but that didn't happen. And from the boys' point of view, there was quite a degree of levity about it all.
Oh,
There
yes.
was no recognition that
No, it was
they
funny.
might have been
Yes.
scaring the lives out to these young girls, impressionable. But yes, it was the girl. Yes, it wasn't very nice for the person who won.
And it was just accepted that that
Yes.
was something that happened. And I don't know how many years it happened.
Well, all the time I was at our college.
Well, that's right. I managed my first year, I managed like to avoid it because I knew what was happening.
Well, it always happened at the same time.
Yeah.
It was always about the end of October or something.
Yeah, something
So
like
we'd
that.
only been in our college maybe for 4 or 5 weeks.
Well, that's right.
And then this happens. And I think subsequent years you kind of knew it was going to happen.
But of course we didn't really, it's looking back that I see absolutely how horrific that was. I mean, and I've got 2 daughters and I just would have been horrified. But in these days, it was just accepted. I mean, I remember being horrified, but I thought, that's what happened. And you just, you know...
But it was, Anne, it was at a time when there was the Miss World competition.
Well, that's
where
right.
people were parading up
Yeah.
and down and they were being given sashes
That's
and
right.
all this.
And-
And I think you were interviewed, because I remember one that Jerry Nixon did.
Uh-huh,
He was the maitre d' of that particular year
uh-huh.
doing, and they were interviewing the girls like in, you know,
Like it
Miss
was
World,
like it
Miss
was Miss
World,
World.
you know.
They also had not a canteen, a revel screen as well,
Yeah.
and that the people in your class nominated you for your popularity or whether they liked you or whatever, or whatever you looked like. And so they nominated you, and then you had to go along in front of a panel of lecturers. I was on my best behaviour, but I was. It was held in the Angus Hotel, and I was wearing a little Dolly Rocker's black dress, Walter State photograph, big dangly earrings, blue, and you had to sit in front of them. And Marion Stewart was there. Marion, she was sitting there, and she was very much a lady, wasn't she?
She was.
Very much a lady, and there was president of the SRC, the Student Recreation Council, and a few other lecturers, and they would ask you questions. And it would be things like, would you ever consider living with anybody before you married them? And of course, what do I say? Am I going to be grown up and say, yeah, because I'm really cool and I'm an art student, or am I going to please Mrs. Stewart, who's going to be horrified? So I can't remember what I said, but I mean, I remember I didn't win it, but it was somebody called Anya Milklaus.
Ah, that's right, Anya.
Yeah, that's right. She had the most beautiful pink dress, and I was a maid of honour. So STV had come along to do the interviews and watch us walking down wherever, and she had her crown on, and I was the maid of honour, so I was hanging around the back there. So on STV, I think you see this bit of my face, and that was my claim to fame from the college. But we never thought there was anything wrong with that either. Whereas it'd be horrified.
There wasn't the edge to the
No.
Revels Queen that there was in the canteen.
No.
No, it was much more rougher.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was
No
the amount
lecturers
of,
were involved either.
it was very much the students, and it was the amount of hand clapping and roaring
Humiliation.
that
Humiliation, yeah.
so that that was how they were picked, really.
So,
Yeah. No, that's all right. I don't want to say it.
Let's move on. So let's talk a bit more about the teaching. So obviously in those days there was a 2-year general course. We were doing a bit of everything. And Sheila, you mentioned life drawing already.
it was Bill Cadenhead.
Bill Cadenhead. Okay. And I know from looking at the life drawings that we have in the collection, there's obviously different rules because the female models are all entirely nude, whereas the male models seem to get to keep their underpants on.
Quite hard to draw as well, actually, because you had to stop where the Y front started, you know, and it was just accepted.
And was there a way in which the tutors were teaching, treating the female students differently from the male students, or the models differently?
It wasn't a
I
particular...
wasn't aware of that at all.
No.
I mean, I didn't feel that there was any difference in how, or any preferential treatment for the males, which might have happened. So no, that I don't recollect at all.
I
No.
do remember somebody saying, a boy, I do remember a boy saying that if his mother had known he was drawing a naked woman, he would have been right out of there, that he would have been allowed. But I think the fact that we did, it was just an accepted part of what we were doing, and that was part of its unique quality to the student experience, unlike going to university where you would not usually have a naked woman. But it was part of the experience, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I didn't feel that males and females were treated differently in any of these classes.
No.
At all. I didn't see that.
And we had a lot of really good lecturers.
We did.
And I felt we did have a lot of respect also for the models, because I can remember my very first life drawing class, drawing a woman, and I remember the silence.
Yeah.
I do remember everybody spent a long time sharpening their pencils.
Or they dropped something on the floor.
Yeah.
But
we were always quite serious about it all, weren't we, really, when we were doing the life drawing.
And then you got somebody like Kedra.
Yes, that's right. Kedra was one of our models who was interesting.
She was also the
Female
president
wrestling.
of the... Yeah, I think she was a wrestler, but she was also the president of the Models Union, and she was an absolute cracker, as they say.
Yeah, she was.
You know, and there's some very interesting stories about her, but she was very professional. Some of the time. Most of the time when the models moved, they would put on their gowns and it would be, absolutely fine, and maybe go out for it. People used to smoke or have a cigarette or whatever else. But Kedra was slightly different. She would maybe wear a dressing gown and it would be quite closed. And so out of the context of the life drawing, that was kind of weird, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
That was a shame.
She was also very tall.
She was.
You know, she was a big woman.
Yes.
Quite
imposing.
impressive.
Yes. And there's a few more stories, but
And, I mean, out with the Canteen Queen and all of that, did you feel there were ways in which male students treated female students in a different way, or...?
No, I personally didn't feel that. I felt that the group, and I've still got lots of male friends that I met there, were very respectful. And if we, like for instance, when we went over to Amsterdam, you can imagine what it'd be like for a whole lot of students going into some of these places in Amsterdam. They were really protective, and they would say to me, Annie, we're going in here, but you have to stand there. And when we come back, you've just to wait there. But what they didn't realise is where I was standing at the end of the bridge was not the thing that you would do in Amsterdam.
On your own. No.
But they were actually very protective, because they would say, "You're not coming, you're not going there." Oh, but I'm an art student. No. But so I don't know if you've got any memories of males and females there.
Not really. No, sorry.
No, I tell you, I think what was good, it really was the 60s, and we were a very fortunate generation that our parents had gone through the war and they wanted us to have a better education and a better standard. And we actually did have the most wonderful time, and we could we felt that there was a freedom, we could think and speak and develop our work in whatever way we felt. And what was interesting was that we came, at that time, most of us managed to get a grant, and so we came from all walks of life. There were some of us that came from very poor backgrounds, and some of us who came from very wealthy backgrounds, and everybody in between. And it was a great leveller, and it was the first time that had really happened in the UK, and it was a wonderful time to be in education.
That's right.
And you know, I just think I lived in a council house at the back of Dundee, and I think when I look along the road where I lived, and there were students, people who were the same as me. Some were going to training college, some were at university, some were at the art college, some were other places trained to be doctors and nurses, and we were all about the same age, and because we were all part of that boom kid generation. And it was really a very levelling experience to be a student in the 60s.
It was such good fun. There was always a lot of laughter. The lecturers were enthusiastic. There was lots of laughter. I remember in my first year, Don Shannon leading us all to singing Massachusetts as we were doing our texture workbook. You know, so we would all sing, and there was always a great sense of camaraderie, wasn't there, and humour. You know, so yeah.
Good. Let's go back.
Go back.
Turn to Sheila again and ask you about your experiences of teaching and whether, first of all, how the male staff treated you, and also whether there were any issues you had with male students as well.
Well, to cut to the chase, there were never any issues with male students. They were all absolutely fine. I deliberately set out to create a tough image when I went there, because what I'd been aware of with the staff at the interview and so on, I realised if it was a woman, I might, be not so well treated, etc. So I made myself into a very tough personality. I wore a pair of steel cap boots. It was also sensible because in etching room, would fall on your feet, so it was partly health and safety. And bought myself a bib and brace suit. So, I looked really workmanlike. And I just basically took no shit from anyone.
Good, right attitude.
I ruled the students with a rod of iron too, partly because of safety, because you can't muck around with an etching press or another printing press, or you're likely to hurt yourself quite seriously. And I remember threatening a student that if he did that again, fooling around, on the press, I would put him through the etching press hands first.
You'd be put away now if you did that.
It's not allowed.
It's not allowed anymore.
But it worked. I think we were quite terrified. I had a very, very good technician who I would like to mention, Ian Anderson, because he was my support. He was absolutely great. He would keep the presses in running order. Every holidays I would get him to strip off the canvas and do that and keep them oiled. If I had to go away somewhere for half an hour to a meeting or something, he was left in charge of just watching the students that they did everything properly. That man was a great helper and friend. I'm just having a think for a minute what I ought to say next. Yes, it was a happy time. I really enjoyed my students, and I tried to get the best out of them that I possibly could. Do you want me to talk about the International Print Exchange?
We'll come back to that
Okay,
a bit
yeah.
later, but thank you for reminding me of that. I wanted to first of all come on to talk about some of the college facilities and particularly around childcare. I know Janet, you mentioned a student getting pregnant at the time.
Well, one of a friend of mine who I met at, we had to do an entrance test to get into the art college. Not only did you have to have the requisite number of hires and O-levels, but you actually went and did a day's life drawing and design and history of art, and you had to pass that test before you even got a letter offering you a place. So it wasn't just
write about an essay about a coffee set.
Yes, that's right, and an essay.
Yeah, I
So
remember designing a cup and saucer or something.
Yeah, that's right. And old Kate was the model
Yes.
that we had to draw, a lovely old lady. And anyway, that day I met one of my fellow students who I ended up living with, and we were naive, and the pill was just coming out for women, so we had boyfriends, and we ended up, well, she sadly ended up pregnant, and she was actually able to go to, well, it was a mother and baby home, because in those days being an unmarried girl with being pregnant was not on at all. Her parents weren't initially very pleased about the situation, so she, at the end of second year, she ended up being sent away to a mother and baby home to have her baby. But I think it was Marion Stewart allowed her to do assignments while she was away having the baby.
Very forward.
And Marion also gave her a lot of her sons.
Oh, did she?
Yeah.
Right, because it was a wee boy she had.
That's right.
And she was allowed to come back to college to finish her studies with her young son, her baby. And
she used to let him come into her studio.
Did she?
Yes, she did.
Because I couldn't remember for a while what she did
just
with the
allowed
baby.
him to, just bring them.
That was really forward thinking.
That was very forward thinking.
Yes,
you know, because usually if you had a child out of wedlock, then you ended up having to give it up for adoption, and it can be quite soul destroying then. But no, so that was. I thought that was very, very forward thinking of the art college and Marion.
She wasn't the one. Lorna Bryson, who was married. Lorna Bryson had her little girl there at that time, and Marion used to allow her to bring her in, and she played in. She'll just give her something to play in the corner or whatever. And she was very understanding.
And Dorothy, you were telling me before that one of the other students represented in the exhibition, Chris Treweek, lobbied to get a
That's
credential.
right. Now, Chris was a textile student as well, and she and I were, our studio, where we worked in the studio was together, so I had a lot to do with Chris, and she became our SRC representative, student representative on the council. And Chris, I'm sure she still is, but in those days she was very forward-thinking and very, always standing up for the underdog. And she decided that, well, I think perhaps the experience that we'd seen brought her to the idea that she wanted to organise a creche for the students. And it was really felt in some circles that this was just ridiculous. Why would no, we don't want to have that. But Chris was very determined, and she went to these meetings and said, we need to help the students that have children to be able to put them into this creche. And she managed to get hold of, at that time, there were one or two empty factories round about the art college, quite a lot of empty buildings at that time near the art college, and she managed to persuade them to rent one of these, and that was the start. That was the first time that we had students, both, there could be male students who had children as well, and female students who were able to bring their children to the creche, and it did. It was. She was. I admired her tremendously for doing that at the time.
Thinking, actually.
And Sheila, I remember you telling me about, I don't know if it was any of the same babies we were talking about, but you had a baby in a cupboard at one point. You were telling me.
I think it was an early evening class. There was a girl, one of the students came down. She wasn't. I think she was probably an evening. One came down, and there was nowhere to put the baby at all. And this was an etching room with fumes and things and solvents in the air. So I ended up, we put the poor baby into the, well, it was a cupboard. It was called my office, but it was just a cupboard, a dark cupboard. I was quite cross. I think I was quite cross to the girl, but I was really worried. Because I thought, you know, why are you bringing the baby in here? She probably had no option. Now,
But,
older,
that's right.
I mean, I was just mid-20s
Yes,
then. I thought,
that's
what on
right.
earth is she bringing a baby in here for?
Yeah.
But, yeah, so I actually asked Matthew a few days ago, was there anything provided at this time, because I wasn't aware of it.
Well, that was obviously Christian.
They had that. Of course, it would only probably be during the school, the art school day. It was wouldn't be maybe in the evening. And there were. It was. You have to remember there was the 60s were a changing time. There was a time where the pill had come on stream, but not if you weren't married. And there was a family planning clinic. Well, it's still used. I don't know if it's used for family planning now, but it's at the foot of Perry Street, and the students would go up there. And if you were married, or it would be anybody, wouldn't it just be students? But it was because it was near the college and the university. It was used a lot by the students. And if you went in, the first things that the doctors asked you was, "Are you married?" And the next thing, if you said no, they said, "When is the date of your marriage?" And if you weren't, then, well, I was definitely asked that.
Oh, really?
And but you were left with the feeling that if you weren't getting married, you were a wee bit loose in your attitude to life. So it was a different time. It was still the time where, as far as society was concerned, nice girls didn't.
Nice girls didn't.
That's
No,
right.
nice girls.
So that was,
That's right.
but it's changed now. No, thankfully.
In France, you could go on the pill. Their method of medicine is different. You don't go to a general practitioner. If you've got a stomachache, you go to a stomach doctor. If you've got a headache, you go to a head doctor.
Oh.
If you want to go on the pill, you go to a gynecologist. And at some point during my year in Paris, living with someone that decided to go on the pill, so I went along and got the pill. When I came back here, it was a different matter.
Yeah,
trouble
that's right.
I had to go to the group clinic, I think, in Edinburgh, in order to continue. It's no use going to your own doctor.
Let's also talk about accommodation. I know that some of you were living at home at the time, but I know some of you were in digs. And certainly I've heard some terrible stories from some of the other male students about kind of rat-infested slum housing. I think, Janet, you said that you got chucked out of your digs for the heinous kind of having a boyfriend.
Sorry, which shall I do this? Well, one of the first, they had a housing officer at the college, and my parents came were living in Glasgow, and so I had to have help finding somewhere to live. And the second place I stayed with a girl whose father was a minister, and he'd gone off to minister somewhere else. Anyway, I didn't stay there long, but Leslie, my friend, and we got, I think it was in Taylor's Lane, we had a flat. And unfortunately, because we had boys would come and stay, my boyfriend at the time was at Edinburgh University, and he would come through and stay the night, and she had a boyfriend who would sometimes come and stay the night. And we were accused by the owner of the flat of virtually running a brothel and got chucked out. You know, you should have a red light over the door, they said, or something like that. So anyway, that was a wee bit humiliating, actually, to say the least. But one place we ended up was over the road from the college at Greenfield House. I don't know if it's still used for student accommodation. And they were all bed sits. So I had a bed, Annie had a bed sit, I had a bed sit. So there was, I think there's 2 rooms in the basement and maybe 2 on the first floor and 4 on the top floor. And you all shared a bathroom.
Shilling.
And you had to have shilling to put in the gas meter if you wanted a bath. And we were trying to work out how did we sort of organise it, because there was male and females, and you just had to queue up.
You had to queue up. Hope you didn't go in after a male, I can tell you.
And quite the health and safety wasn't quite there, because the beds, I had a wee gas ring and oven and
two rings.
So it was. I don't think you'd be allowed that now. I'm not sure, but definitely it was a bit. Yeah, a bit dodgy.
Yeah. Well, I'd lived at home for the first term, but my dad worked on the railway and he had 24 different shifts. And my mum worked in the jute mill. And we'd moved from the middle of Dundee out to Charleston. It really was awfully posh because it had a bath. It had a bathroom in it. But the problem was, because my dad was on all these shifts, my mum and dad slept in the living room down the stairs. I had a pull-down sofa. And when I was 10, my brother and I had bedrooms. So when my dad was on the shifts, he had to sleep in one of the beds up the stairs. So when I came home from art college, there was nowhere to do any painting. And then I got a terrible row for trying to paint in the living room carpet. One of these big swirly carpets. So I wrote away to what was it called? The Scottish Grants place. Explained my situation, which wasn't very good for an art student because there was no room to work, and they gave me a living away from home grant. And my first flat was in 2 Easton's Angle, and it had the bath in one of the girls' bedrooms. I shared that with 3 other girls. So that was my first experience, and I think that's partly the reason I failed first year, because we had such good fun. And Lizzie's flat was painted bright red. Mine was something more arty, like black and khaki, I think. And then I think I moved from there into, I was in St Peter Street, and I remember the ceiling came down in the loo, because they were really quite rough, very rough, and dead mice on the sofa. And so I shared with my friend Walter, the one that took all the photographs one year. Yes,
yeah.
So Walter and I shared a flat for a year. His mum had to come His mum had to come down from Brechin to make sure I was suitable to share a flat with. So I really cleaned the flat and got any dead mice and everything were out the road. So and tidied all my room. And so Walter's mum came down and she sort of sat there and asked me questions. But Walter was allowed, I don't know why, he was allowed to share with me. And so we were really close friends anyway from first year, so that was really good. That was okay, because I was actually engaged at the time, so that was fine, that was okay. But then I went to 64 Hawk Hill, and really big old tenements, and that really was an experience because it had the Pletties, but it was really quite derelict, and a lot of the area around there was starting to come down. Belmont Hall was there, I remember that. You can maybe go to the back of the university for the Students' Union. I remember that, and I lived up on the top floor. There was 3 flats on the Pletties. There was no loo, there was 2 rooms, lots of mice, really lots of mice. So 3 of us had 3 individual flats. The loo was on the stairs. There was an attic room up the stairs, and that was Davy Macfarlane and Callum and the 3 boys up there, and they just had a sink and a brass tap.
Yeah, you don't want to know.
And that was right up in the ceiling, and we had one loo actually on the stairs, but we were meant to all share. Of course, you wouldn't go in there during the night or anything because there was spiders, and really quite horrific actually, because there was 3 boys from upstairs as well, so everybody had buckets, which we then had to go put in the loo. But it really was minging, as they say in Dundee,
I think students today would be
horrified
at that. I mean, I lived at home right through art college, but one of the tales I always remember was Kate. We were talking about this model, older lady, Kate, and she came in one day and she had a mark on her cheek, and we were all saying, "Oh, what's happened?" You know, well, she'd been lying in bed and a rat had bitten her on the cheek, and she managed to get it away, but that story stayed with me. I thought, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So I went back on the bus, number 10 bus, every night.
Yeah, and there was
To my mum.
there was no bathrooms or anything, so everybody was really good at getting the big basin of water or going into the art college, so you went in and used the showers. Although in first year you had to be careful what shower you used, I can tell you, because there was one on the second floor, and a lot of the first year girls would use that one, because what they didn't know was that the window was sort of semi-transparent. And what used to happen, somebody would say, "There's a young lassie just going," so all the architects, as it was always, were all out, and they were all in the fourth year corridor watching this young woman actually in the shower and cheering and everything else, and of course she wouldn't know, you wouldn't know, so people soon learned not to go to that one. But yeah, we used to go there for our showers, and I went home once a week for a bath and a bag of food from my parents.
And Sheila, were you living in Dundee at the time, or were you commuting in when you were?
Thank you. I was living in Dundee to begin with. I had a flat up the Perth Road, and then I got married, so we were living out at near Cooper Angus to begin with. And I'm sure I told you before that narrow close that runs up the side of the college.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
That I was going up there one day to the pub at lunchtime. I mean,
You went to the pub at lunchtime?
yeah,
We
I
did.
left a plate and acid while I was on my way up to the pub.
Uh-huh.
And I had just started going out with Michael Green, and for about 6 months, and then suddenly he cut me dead and would look at me, and I thought, what earth is wrong with him? And so I just ignored him until the day when I was walking up there to the pub, and I suddenly heard shouting and a motor revving at the bottom of the close. And I looked round and I saw Michael in his Volkswagen, and he was shouting something at me, and I thought, he's really lost it now. So I started running, and I ran up the close and then looking for somewhere to go, bolted into a kind of side bit until it was a dead end, so I was like pinned to the wall by the car.
Oh no!
And he was hanging out of the window shouting, "Will you marry me?"
Oh, oh, that's nice. That's lovely.
What would you have said in that?
Well, you have no choice, have you?
So we continued up the road to the pub and proceeded to drink. I don't even remember what we drank. I think I had brandy or something.
So did you say yes?
Brandon Bakesham, you said
Yes,
yes.
of course I did. Because I thought I was going to
Say
run
no.
over if it.
But we used to drink at lunchtime, Sheila.
Yes.
And I remember life drawing classes, and we had a class in the morning, and sorry, I'll take that. And we would go over to the Grosvenor, which was just over the road, and you would have maybe a pie and a pint. Well, I was absolutely tiny, so by the time I drunk a pint, I was skew-whiffed, to say the least, and we had to go back into Jimmy Morrison's drawing class, which wasn't really a very good idea, because apart from the fact you were giggling, you were getting really sleepy and you were trying to draw. So I soon learned not to have a pint, and I had a half pint of milk with a pie so that I could do my drawing, so it was actually quite good. But everybody used to just come in, and they were all really quite merry, and you know.
So were the lecturers.
I had the lecturers as well.
We used to have a phase of walking up the road to a pub there. It's a famous one now.
Tav. The Tav.
No, it wasn't the Tav. It was
Bully
just up
Cruise.
the Perth Road.
Benny's.
And
Oh, Manny's.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there was an old railwayman, a train driver, used to entertain us in there, the tales of his life on the
Right.
railway.
There you go.
And then you came back down slightly light-headed.
It was just accepted.
Yes.
It really was. Or over at Lanes for a schooner of sherry for 2 9pence.
Goodness.
So I know that the tab seems to be the most legendary of the pubs for art students. So were there particular times, would it be like the Grosvenor for lunch and tab in the evening, or how would you do that?
Well, I remember the Grosvenor during the day,
Yes.
or lanes over the road.
Uh-huh.
And they used to have special nights where you got, like, I think there's a Heineken night where you got so many pints for £1 or something. But I remember that, so we used to go there, and the tab seemed to be more than equalised.
Yeah, the evening, I seem to remember.
It was so tightly, you were so tightly squashed in, and if you wanted to go to the loo, there was only one loo, and it really was really difficult to get to the loo. But there was a loo in the pub just next to it, which was called Willie Frew's, and you could go there except there was water running down the walls of Willie Frew's and out the door, so you had to put on your waders if you were going in there.
I don't remember that.
And I wanted to sort of briefly ask generally about social life at that time, because obviously a lot of it did seem to revolve around going to the pub. But I've seen obviously photos that Walter took of like the football teams and so on. But again, you get that sense of a very sort of male culture. So I'm wondering what the women did.
We went with the males.
Right.
You want to say?
Well, we used to. Well, do you remember?
Well, our year was very close here, and we actually all used to go to the pictures together. I don't know if it was just painters or if you remember that as well.
Well, living at home, I just went home.
All right, you just went. Oh.
We used to go to the pictures.
We'd go to the cinema and we'd take up one whole row in the cinema all together.
And got put out quite a lot.
Yeah.
Because of tortures.
Or we'd all go back to Annie's.
Well, when was it the Gourmet? Was it the Gourmet? The ABC, I think it was.
It was the one that showed foreign films. I remember.
That was the
seeing-
Tivoli.
Tivoli.
Was it the Tivoli?
That was a bit risque, and you could get a drink there.
Right.
I do think
After hours.
there was a not a division, but there was a difference between those who lived at home and those who did not, because the accommodation for those not at home was so, as has been described, was really very difficult for many of them. So they did have to find, they had to go to the pubs and get the entertainment from. They had to find somewhere outside that they could enjoy and entertain. And I was like Sheila, I lived at home, but being a bit older, when I was 24, someone also asked me if I would like to marry them. And I'd known him for some years, and I decided, well, yeah, he's all right, I'll get married. So I got married at the end of third year. And we set up home together, and it was fine. Yeah, I've been married to him for 51 years, so I must have done something right. Anyway, he certainly has, so he's been a great husband. But anyway, what I was going to say was, I didn't really think ahead about this because I got a grant, and when I let the grant folk know that I had married, I naively didn't realise I would no longer get a grant.
Oh.
I got a married woman's allowance, which was £50 for the year. But I had already been awarded, given the grant was sent out, and you got it in September as the college started. So that was my grant to last me till Christmas. But they clawed that back from me, and I just got married. And I had this £50 to last me the year, but I didn't get any of it because it was part of my grant. So I lived without my grant for that year, and also for the year I went to teacher training college. Because your husband was expected to keep you and support you. But what they didn't realise was that my father was more able to support me at that time than my husband was. So it was quite a trial to find out I had no income. Luckily we managed to get through it. So I must have done something right.
Yeah. No, I was just remembering, we didn't have televisions you know,
No.
in our bed sits or our flats.
No.
We didn't have televisions. You had the television in the common room at the art school. I remember that, and I remember going to watch Top of the Pops on a Thursday night. But apart from that, we didn't have telly, so it wasn't like you would go home and, like it is now, you know, or watch Netflix or whatever.
You went
So
to
we had
parties.
to. Yeah, but you didn't have parties every night.
Well, speak for yourself, Janet.
So it was, you had to find your own amusement, and I think that's probably why we ended up down the pub. And we also worked late at night at the college.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't sort of clock off at 5 or 6.
No.
And especially in the design.
Closed the college at 9 o'clock, didn't they?
Yeah.
Well,
It
actually,
was
I think it was while you were there, they extended it till 11:30.
Till 11:30, yes.
Because of student demand.
I remember with
Can't imagine that, really.
Leslie staying late at night. So yeah, so we didn't have the sort of amusements or the going to gigs or anything like you do now. I mean, we used to have college dances, didn't we, along at the Invercaps.
Yes.
Hops.
Or in the
Yeah.
hall as well.
And
But there was a painter, what's his name? Peter. And he ended up teaching through in Stirling. And I remember he had done a degree in the university and couldn't believe when he came to the art college that we worked Monday to Friday, 9 till 9,
Fine.
whatever.
Yeah.
He was, you know, it was quite a different whole
Yeah.
work regime was quite different.
And when it came up to your diploma, we did the all-nighters.
Yes.
They kept the
Yeah.
college open, and I mean, I remember 11, 12 o'clock at night. You know, you worked straight through.
And we had a night class as well for art history that we had to go to.
Yeah.
And drawing classes. Neil Dallas Brown used to do a drawing class in sort of early
he did
evening,
that.
Yeah.
a twilight thing. It was great though.
Yeah.
I mean, all you're saying about living in flats and we were living at home, but I think the community that was formed is probably, I think everybody's career has gone in different ways,
Yeah.
but the community that was formed and the friendships formed
Yes.
Yeah.
have lasted, and they were
Yeah.
the main thing, really, looking back from this bit.
Yeah. Definitely.
I want to come back to Sheila. You mentioned this earlier, but just to get to talk about some of the various things that you did while you were working here, including that international print exchange that you mentioned, which is quite an extraordinary enterprise.
Yes, I wanted to open the eyes a bit more about other places, other ways of doing things, other people. During my time in Paris, I made quite a lot of connections. The flat that we lived in during the time we were printing posters belonged to an Argentinian artist called Enrique Sagnato, who was married to Sheila Hicks, the tapestry designer you've probably heard of. And we were looking after it while they were on holiday in South America. And when I came back here, I used some of the connections that I had with other places to try to inject, you know, a spark of enthusiasm and a looking out rather than looking in all the time. Looking out there to the wider world was my idea. So I managed with some of my foreign connections to organise an international print exhibition, and it included an exchange with Illinois State University, the Pratt Institute of Design in New York, and a university in the south of France, where the department was run by a Frenchman called Patrice Vermeer. And they would all send work to me, and then we would send work to some of the other places. We didn't in the end manage to send to all, but we managed to send to the American ones. So it was a huge thing to organise. It was a great success. We held it. There was a bit of a problem with the art school and my relationship with Meyer Lakem, the head of design, because he took the huff, I think, because initially he wasn't asked to open it. I was asking someone else. And he just made life very difficult for me. He wouldn't give me a space in the art school. There was a lot of work came over. He wouldn't give, basically he tried to screw it up. And the work was already on its way. I wasn't going to let that happen. So I used other contacts I had here, and were able to get the place down the road at Rosangle as a venue for showing an exhibition. He wouldn't open it, but the director of the Compass Gallery in Glasgow, which I had connections with, said, I'd be delighted to come up and open it if we can show it down in Glasgow as well.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah.
But it was one hell of a lot of work living out at Cooper Angus, because I was allowed to use some of the frames that were in the art school, but because I wasn't being given any other kind of help, I remember taking a whole lot of work home to frame, and I'm not a good framer. It was a nightmare, very hard wood, the nails kept popping out, but that's what I did. I took it all home and framed it there and took it in, and it received a lot of acclaim. People came down from Grays in Aberdeen to see it. I remember a whole busload of people, including Arthur Watson, who was a student at that time, came down to see the foreign prints. I always had a kind of rocky relationship with some of the people on the staff. There was difficulty about working together. Some of them hated each other. The head of design and the head of painting seemed to be in a collision course most of the time. And it was difficult to get funding from the students. And one year, well, I read Machiavelli, and that helped quite a lot to think about politics and what you have to do. And we needed a class put on for the painting students. I wanted to inject a little bit of the more laid-back atmosphere on the painting side into the design school, because it was very, very tight, and for printmaking sometimes you need to loosen up a bit. So I thought if I put on a class for the painters, it would have a good effect on the design students. But nobody was going to fund it. So I said to the head of design, he said, I'm not funding that. And I said, well, do you think that maybe if I persuaded the School of Painting to give money for the materials, would you be prepared to pay a member of staff? And he said, you'll never do that. He said, and then and glint came into his eye, the thought of the painting school paying for something for the design school. He said, okay, you go ahead, if you can do it, that's on. So I then went over to the head of painting, and I said to him, listen, I want to put on this class for some of your students. I said that we need some funding. Now the design school have said they'll pay for a tutor. Would you be prepared to put up some money for paper? And he said, you never get mad, they can fund something. And I said, yes, if you do the paper, we can do that. And that way I managed to put the class on, and I got Terence Keast to run that class for us.
Very good.
So but that's what it was like in there. There was so much politics going on all the time.
Yeah.
So the students are totally oblivious.
Yeah, we wouldn't know it.
Yeah, we were totally oblivious as well.
I'm conscious of time because we do want to finish by 5:30, so maybe I thought if I could just get each of you to sort of briefly, I realise you could talk forever about this, but briefly summarise all the things you did after the art college and what you've done since. So,
right, okay.
Anyway.
Well, like most drawing and painting students, I trotted along to the training college in Dundee. So I did that for a year, went into schools. Took great delight to go back to the junior secondary school, who told me I wouldn't get past the jute mill as a teacher, and I went in the front door, so I really enjoyed that. So I taught for 4 years. I had my first daughter, then I did a bit of interior design in a company, and then I was very fortunate to get a job in Dundee College. So I was there for 27 years as lecturer, eventually running the portfolio courses, which were the feeder for the art college, so that was good. And during all that time, I did my own work. It was always something that I did when I came home before I had children, and even when I did have children, I sort of managed. And I think after 3 years out of art college, I got something in the Scottish Academy, and I was quite delighted with that. And I thought, oh, maybe I could just do this. But it's very difficult when you have a career and you have a family to do it, I think. But I sold my first painting from a diploma show, a little thing of anemones, and then I thought, people actually give you money for this. Okay, maybe I could do this then. So I've always painted, only because I loved doing it, and if somebody wanted to buy it, that was good. And had, a bit of success, I would say. So there you go. There you go, Jen.
Okay, thank you. Well, I did the teaching year as well, and I'd also been a student at Hospital Field. I don't know if you know the history of Hospital Field. So after I did my teacher training year, I went back to Hospital Field as the cook. I'd been actually the cook there for 2 or 3 years for other students. And at the same time, I was doing part-time visiting art teacher to 3 primary schools in Moneyfeith and Arbroath, and at the same time putting together a portfolio which I applied to the British Council for an international scholarship to do a postgraduate year in art. And I ended up going to Belgrade University to do a postgrad year. I had hoped to go to Sarajevo because at that time, when Tito was still alive, I loved the Islamic influence, and as much as I would have loved to have gone to Iran to study, I wasn't brave enough at that time, so I thought I would hopefully get to Sarajevo Art School, but they didn't have a postgraduate year, so I ended up a year in Belgrade, which was fair enough. I was still painting, but I took the long road home. I went on the hippie trail and I did go to Iran, to Isfahan and Shiraz and Tehran, through Pakistan, round India, up to Nepal, back through Afghanistan and the Khyber Pass, and back across and eventually coming home. My mum and dad by that time were living in Whitley Bay, just outside Newcastle, and coming back, my mum said to me, let's pop into this little art centre in Whitley Bay. They might show your work. And they didn't show my work, but I got a job with them, and they ended up creating a big art centre in Newcastle at that time in the late 70s. So I worked with them for a couple of years, and I was then I'd met this lawyer who was putting together something called Art Law in London, which gave free legal advice to artists, and again, I'd put on some lectures in Newcastle, and he'd said to me, would you come down to London? We're setting up this art law thing that gave advice to artists. And it was like a legal clinic for artists, so I went down and did that. All the time I've been creating my own work as well. Some of the artists that came to Art Law to get advice were people like Eduardo Palozzi. So I met a whole broad spectrum of artists there. Art Law sadly lost funding. The Arts Council no longer wanted to fund it. But the lawyers involved with Art Law set up an organisation called the Design and Artist Copyright Society, DACS, which is like a role of music and PRS, where you get your royalties for music. DACS is the equivalent for artists. And if you're artists and not a member of DACS, you should join. You should sign up. It doesn't cost, I don't think, it used to cost £25. I'm not sure what it costs now. And I ended up working part-time with them for 30-odd years. I just retired before COVID. And as I say, all the time I've been showing my own work as a painter, and I'm still showing work. And yeah, so I've done other things, but I'll give you all mine.
Well, I have remained in Dundee. I was born, educated, and brought my family up in Dundee, and I've lived and worked in Dundee all my life, and it's a brilliant city to live and work in. I've never felt unfortunate to not have remained here. When I like Anne and I were in the same class at training college, and I can remember the day that we found out how much we were going to be earning as teachers. We couldn't believe it. Suddenly we were going to have something like £30 a week, which was at that time for us seemed wonderful. Anyway, I went into Craigie High School, and I remained there until I had my family, and I worked from home on some of my artwork and textile work, and I sold work from home. And then I got back into teaching, and I've taught in almost every school in the city. I was appointed principal teacher of art and design in Lunmathan High, and then I was assistant rector there for some years, which was interesting too. I learned a lot about the politics of that goes on in education when I was in that situation, but I really wanted to get back to the arts. So when the schools, there was 2 schools merged, which was Whitfield and Lunmathan, and it became Braveview Academy. I went there as principal teacher, and I was there until I retired in 2004. However, during all that time, I continued my own artwork, and I was involved with a founder member of Embryo, Dundee Textile Artists, and also Edge. And there was Sheila and I both at one point were the chairman of these, and we were involved and have been very much involved in setting up exhibitions throughout the UK with that, and doing our own work and continuing our own work. But since my retirement, I've ended up trying to help people from all levels of ability in art, particularly folk. So many people come and say to me, I wish I could have done art, but I had to go and be whatever, secretary or whatever the other thing was. My mum and dad said I had to get a proper job. And so many of these people come back and now want to do it in their leisure time. And so I am currently president of Broughty Ferry Arts Society, and I work very much, well, I did before the lockdown, with the schools in the area, and to encourage the young people in the schools, but also to encourage the elderly and the folk in the middle years. So we've got have online exhibitions as well as exhibitions within the gallery in Broughty Ferry. Well, it's in the Scout Hall, but it makes a brilliant gallery. So that's kind of what I'm doing. Not very much.
Well, excuse me. I think when we, as I said, when I went to art college, I always had it in mind that I would be a teacher. So as we've all said, we went to training college, and I really enjoyed being a teacher. I taught mostly in secondary schools, but for about 15 years I was in a unit for behavioural support, a non-reintegrative unit, so that the kids were sort of 14 to 16-year-olds. And while the art that they were taught was not what you would expect for higher school or in a normal school, I think I learned more about teaching, working with these kids who had really difficult backgrounds. Drug issues were coming to be more and more prevalent, and I just learned far more about teaching, working with these kids, than I did working in an ordinary school. And then out of the blue, because all my jobs have come kind of out of the blue, I had an offer to go and work at Dundee College, and I took over the City and Guilds course, which was a stitch textile course, women, mostly women, but it wasn't exclusively, but in my time it was all women. Mm-hmm. They came in for 1 day a week, and it was just a lovely job. And it was a lovely end to a sort of institutional teaching experience. I then did it for 4 years as an independent tutor, and I still do works. I was down in Birmingham doing a summer school this year, so I just enjoy teaching. I like the back and forth, and it's a two-way street, when you're teaching. So I do that, but I've always done my own work, as Dorothy said, and Dorothy and I were members of Embryo, which was set up, I think, at Marion Stewart's suggestion, because there were very few opportunities for textile artists to exhibit, and that's a situation that continues to this day. If you go into a gallery, whenever you say that you do textiles, I don't know what they're expecting, whether it's, and I'm not demeaning anything by saying what I'm going to say, but whether they think you're doing crochet blankets or you're doing patchwork, it's nothing to do with that being a lesser form. But galleries will just not take you on, and it's a real... So the idea was, if we formed a group, we could have our own exhibitions, which was very successful for the 20 years it ran. And then Edge, Textile Artists Scotland, was formed. But I think it was in 2013, I think, I was invited to join Textile Study Group, which is a national group, and I exhibit with them as well. So just carrying on. Life.
I mean, I think the thing is about our art education is you never stop learning. You're always learning something new, and I think what it gave us was that ability to try and tackle new things and to be creative. And when I retired from teaching, I joined the Printmakers Workshop, as my friend Anne will tell you, and decided I would learn screen printing from scratch. And I've really enjoyed that challenge, and I think it's all of us seem to be really interested in still challenging yourself. And I think it's the one thing the art college actually gave us, which was...
Well, I'm
fabulous.
the opposite. I'm trying to learn how to paint.
Well, that's right. There's so much to learn and so much to do. I think it's...
That's right, yeah.
I think that's a good place to draw to. I'm conscious there's lots more things we could ask you, but sadly we're out of time. But I think you'll agree that it's been a really fascinating evening, and thank you so much to all of you for those wonderful stories. So I think a big round of applause.